Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. I just wanted to bring you all a quick video this morning, or this afternoon actually. I'm about to get into my day, but I wanted to post something today. I'm going to start off with a comment, basically a comment thread that I thought was very interesting. It talks about denialism and religion. I'm not saying all denialists are religious, but there is a certain element, I believe, in maybe the escapism that is inherent in religion or religious beliefs that lends to being able to deny what is right in front of your face as far as the reality. Anyways, the thread started off with Matthew Kramer saying, the key element for all climate change denial, no matter how wild the theory, is that humans are not the cause. These are people who claim we are entering another ice age, despite the undeniable fact that the opposite is happening. Love the channel, and I respect your desire to keep it civil. I'm just going to talk about that comment really quickly. Yes, more denialists or other theory kind of people have been jumping on the channel, and there are a few regulars that kind of regularly post about it's not carbon, it's this, it's deforestation, or it's something else, whatever, bullshit. Yeah, we. I know you want to take our, deforestation is definitely our fault. It's definitely something we can do something about, but it's not just deforestation. It is the warming of the climate due to greenhouse gases, due to the changing of the ecosystems, due to geoengineering on a mass scale. Due to our pollution. And, for those grand solar minimum, the earth is cooling people. The evidence is right. You cannot, I don't know how you can say this while watching glaciers melt, while there are pictures and pictures and pictures. Just go look at pictures of glaciers, a comparative from 100 years ago to now. All glaciers all over the world are melting. The Arctic ice cap is melting and almost gone. This is not the sign of cooling. We are setting heat records all over the planet. This is not the sign of cooling. This is the exact opposite of that. So you're just living in opposite land, and I don't know what else to say to you, really, honestly. So we'll move on. The 81 kid replied, we live in a narcissistic, sociopathic society. Sociopaths believe that laws and rules do not apply to them. Very true. Our culture believes that natural laws do not apply to us. Very true. That we're special, that we get special treatment. I don't see any other way to see our society. I don't know if it's the cause or not, but there's a definite Christian, maybe Abrahamic religion characteristic here. God told Adam and Eve that the Garden of Eden was theirs to use and to be fruitful and multiply. Use the planet, the animals, the resources, and endless growth, because human beings are special. I know it's not that simple. And the Bible also says many other things, but that's part of that most modern Christians really take home. We are special. God will save us. We can do no wrong. And let me add, we are made in God's image, right? We are God-like. We are, we're super special. Diane Jones replies, that be fruitful and multiply thing, God supposedly instructed that after Noah and a few others came off the ark, when there were, according to the story, I don't know, maybe 10 extremely horny people, not 7.6 billion extremely horny people on the earth. I'm sure there's a fundamentalist Christian out there who can correct me on the numbers and cite chapter and verse and multiple translations to prove it. Regarding anthropogenic climate change deniers, one can simply look at an air quality weather map and see the stinky, hot, unhealthy air masses in the places where there are the most people. and or simply go into a forest where there are few or no people and directly experience the astounding differences in the environment there as opposed to heavily populated, environmentally destroyed areas. It's not that hard to understand. PK signs, sorry, PK, I don't know if I'm messing up the last name. The Bible also said that we are the stewards over his earth. We didn't keep up our end of the deal. Why should God? And replied again, the next time God destroys the earth, it will not be by a flood of water, but by a rain of fire. Diane Jones replies, PK Science, congratulations on your fundamentalist Christian approved comments, correct capitalization of the B in the Bible and G in God. You get the Enviro Destructo Fundi seal of approved gold star, yay. The 81 kid says the Bible says a lot of things. People still believe that they are either literally true or are supposed to be read as literally true. From what I've read and learned, it's much more likely that they are ancient stories passed down first orally, then in writing over thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years, more hundreds of thousands of years is at least possible. They are from a time when symbolism and inherent meaning were part of human nature. They told us about our world and our place in it. Now we only understand things literally, technically. People should read the story of the Tower of Babel more. When humans start to believe they are gods, and how often do you see that or hear that right now on social media? I see people saying they are God or they are gods and can reach up to the heavens. It's usually just before the fall. People should read the Bible more. These are stories with a lot of meaning. And I understand that the idea that we are God or we have God within us or we have God, power within us is meant to be an empowering idea. But it runs extremely contrary to the idea of being humble and listening and being open to new information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Be very careful with that idea is all I have to say. The 81 kid, I have read it quite a bit alone and in Bible groups where most people tend to use it in their own way to affirm and promote what they already want to think and what they want others to think. It is an interesting book and it is interesting to see how people interpret it. 81 kid says, yes, people tend to interpret the Bible to support their pre-existing beliefs. Just like science and facts today, people interpret it or downright ignore it to fit their pre-existing worldview. Dun, 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 which tells me that religion quickly became just another institution that people use for their own ends, like economics, politics, and even science. I'm not referring to the scientific method, but to science as it's commonly thought of, or maybe we can call it pop science. And great ending to this thread because, science, the scientific method is what we all should be upholding and looking at. Indeed, the difference between the idea of abrupt climate change and and the lukewarmest climate change idea that everybody in the world kind of believes in is the difference between the scientific method and pop science, or actually studying the science yourself and coming to your own conclusions, or studying the science and seeing what it's actually saying instead of just believing what somebody else says about it and going like, oh yeah, that's what I believe. And that applies to many other things as well. I'm not even going to go into it. And right below this, a really great comment from Owl Nation Legal. I saw a good video dealing with both climate issues and climate deniers, as well as the near-term catastrophic future. It starts with the scientist writing 2 + 2 = 4 on a chalkboard, stating if we can't agree on that, then there's no point arguing with you for a single second. You have issues no evidence can cure. He follows that with known facts, like jumping out of a high-rise window means you'll die. If we can't agree on well-known scientific facts like that, again, there is no point arguing with a suicidal idiot. Then he shows the most important graph, ice extent collapsing, heading to 0, and if we can't agree on that, and you think both NASA and Greenland Eskimos are all lying to you and have paranoia issues, you have paranoia issues and you are mental. Even Chinese exporters and Russian oil and gas companies are licking their chops as the water opens up. Then he shows excuse me. Then he shows rising, then raging summer temps and asks, if you clearly understand as temps rise, cities get warmer, then hotter. Now, if we're all still in agreement and you still want to deny we're all going to die, you should move to a Phoenix apartment with no AC, a dirt cheap deal, and see how long you survive. In short, if you want to argue people, pets, and crops can live in 120, 130 degree weather, you're an idiot. If you can't do the math of a simple graph showing rising temperatures and extended temperature trend line graph, you have a problem using a crayon he can't cure. At that point, recognizing and agreeing high temps are melting ice leading to rising temps, and you have firsthand evidence of a positive feedback loop. Concluding, if you think growing modern crops and livestock in 120, 140 degree temps is possible, or you'll survive without food or water due to rising drought frequency, you again have mental issues and should be locked up as a nut and a danger to yourself until you grow a brain. None of us do well in high temps or a world without food and water. Duh. Now that we have agreed on trends and effects with zero debate about it, and you've proven you can operate a crayon and aren't insane or a danger to yourself and others, James Baker, the question becomes, do you recognize the difference between zero emission, wind, solar versus oil, gas, and coal or not? If not, you can't comprehend the well-known, proven scientifically measured effects of CO2 and methane as greenhouse gases trapping heat. And you can't understand why everyone wants to keep greenhouse gas levels low and temperatures cool. Again, you should be locked up as a danger to yourself. You're the kind of idiot unfit to be near gas lines, service station, fuel pumps, propane cylinders, and 101,000 dangers that require some degree of caution. In conclusion, if you get all this and still want to argue, you're obviously lying, a fraud who should again be charged and arrested as danger to others. He also reminds us, since you're a clear danger to children in the real world, you should be shot on sight like a rabid dog. Now that we agree rabid dogs should be shot on sight, knowing a lot of climate deniers have guns, he makes a case for background and mental tests for gun owners, starting with this logical discussion, and thereby answering whether or not you're mentally fit to own a gun or even drive a car. People who are a danger to themselves or others should own neither. And if you disagree with that, we are back to the rabid dog problem, which has a simple solution. The simple paragraph sums up society's catastrophic failure. We're all going extinct simply because we were too kind, too civilized, too stupid, and too slow to save humanity and ourselves, simply shooting stubborn, stupid climate deniers on sight. Pop quiz. If a rabid dog or a grizzly threatened your kids, you would, case closed. Knowing this, any judge today who allows oil and gas drilling, fracking, pipelines, and tankers to continue operating is also a proven danger to society. And while we can't shoot inept or crooked judges as easily as rabid dogs, even though they are 1 million times more dangerous, they can and should be immediately removed from public service. Then we can figure out if that judge should own a firearm, a car, or operate a gas stove. Yeah, great comment. And I often wonder, like, if I kind of often wonder if we're too nice for our own good. I still hold dearly to the idea that we, that being kinder and gentler and more compassionate is the way forward. It's, kind of the only way forward. However, if we really had laws in place, if driving a car was, or getting on an airplane, were seen as the existential threats that they were, you would absolutely not allow people to do either of those things. Absolutely not. By, whatever means necessary, police intervention, or, whatever it might be. Citizens arrest. Moving on. From Robert Scribbler, never before experienced rains hammered Japan during early July. We've never experienced this kind of rain before. This is a situation of extreme danger. The Japan Meteorological Agency. During recent days, as much as 25 inches of rain have fallen over parts of Japan, shattering previous all-time precipitation records for parts of the island nation. The resulting floods have spurred a major emergency response by 54,000 personnel, taking the lives of more than 125 people and forced more than 2.8 million to evacuate. On July 3rd, Typhoon Praparoon swept over southwestern Japan, bringing with it a spate of heavy rains. Over the following days, Praparoon got caught up in a stationary front, even as a high-pressure system to the east continued to circulate tropical moisture into the region. Beneath the eastern high, sea surface temperatures ranged between 2 and 3.5 degrees Celsius above normal. Meanwhile, warmer than normal ocean surfaces dominated a region of the Philippines. These large, abnormally warm zones produced excess evaporation, which helped to feed even more moisture into the region. The result was a historic and devastating rain event for Japan. Isolated locations received more than 39 inches of rain over a 3-day period, with 1-hour rainfall exceeding 3 inches in a number of locations. Motoyami received 1-day rains of 23 inches, with Mount Ontake seeing more than 25 inches over 3 days. Japan's recent extreme rainfall, rising global temperatures increase overall atmospheric moisture loading by approximately 8% for each degree Celsius of global temperature increase. Water vapor provides fuel for storms, both through enhancing convection and by engorging clouds with moisture. Recent scientific studies have found that climate change can greatly enhance the peak intensity of the most severe storms in this way. And the U.S. National Climate Assessment has identified a historical trend of increasing instances of heavy precipitation. And on that note, I'm going to link because I saw this video twice this morning, I watched part of it, not all of it. It's an hour long. It's called Climate Change, Why We Are Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It. And it has Roger Hallam talking. He's a co-founder of the Radical think tank. Brings very sobering information about climate change in this video. I'm going to link it below. He says that for every 1 degree of temperature that we increase, that we should automatically add another 1 degree because of the water vapor that 1 degree warming brings with it. So the warming of 1 degree brings enough water vapor into the air to automatically give us another degree. So do the math. Moving on from, this is a abstract. Future warming increases probability of globally synchronized maize production shocks. Climate-induced shocks in grain production are a major contributor to global market volatility, which creates uncertainty for cereal farmers and agribusiness and reduces food access for poor consumers when production falls and prices spike. Our study, by combining empirical models of maize production with future warming scenarios, shows that in a warmer climate, maize yields will decrease and become more variable because just a few countries dominate global maize production and trade. Simultaneous production shocks in these countries can have a tremendous impact on global markets. We show that such synchronous shocks are rare now, but will become much more likely if the climate continues to warm, and it will. Our results underscore the need for continued investments in breeding for heat tolerance. Meeting the global food demand of roughly 10 billion people by the middle of the 21st century will become increasingly challenging. We're not going to make it there, I'm sorry to say. Earlier studies suggest that once the optimum growing temperature is exceeded, mean crop yields decline and the variability of yield increases, even if interannual climate variability remains unchanged. Here we use global data sets of maize production and climate variability, combined with future temperature projections to quantify how yield variability will change in the world's major maize producing and exporting countries under 2C and 4C of global warming. We find that as global mean temperature increases, absent changes in temperature variability or breeding gains in heat tolerance, the coefficient of variation of maize yields increases almost everywhere. Excuse me. Increases almost everywhere to values much larger than present day values. The higher CV is due both to an increase in The SD of yields and a decrease to values much larger than present day values. Decrease in mean yields, excuse me. For the top 4 maize exporting countries, which account for 87% of global maize exports, the probability that they have simultaneous production losses greater than 10% in any given year is presently virtually zero, but increases to 7% under 2C warming and 86% under 4C warming. Well, that's quite a rise. Our results portend rising instability in global grain trades and international grain prices, affecting especially, excuse me, the 8 million people living in extreme poverty who are most vulnerable to food price spikes. They also underscore the urgency of investments in breeding for heat tolerance. Moving on to the last article I'm going to read today. This is from June 26th. The Guardian: Rising seas, Florida is about to be wiped off the map. Sea level rises are not some distant threat. For many Americans, they are very real. In an extract from her chilling new book, Rising, Elizabeth Rush details how the U.S. coastline will be radically transformed in the coming years. In 1890, just over 6,000 people lived in the damp lowlands of South Florida. Since then, the wetlands that covered half the state have been largely drained, strip malls have replaced Seminole camps, and the population has increased 1,000-fold. Over roughly the same amount of time, the number of black college degree holders in the United States also increased 1,000-fold, as did the speed at which we fly, the combined carbon emissions of the Middle East, and the entire population of Thailand. About 60 of the region's more than 6 million residents have gathered in the Cox Science Building at the University of Miami on a sunny Saturday morning in 2016 to hear Harold Wanless, or Hal, chair of the geology department, speak about sea level rise. Only 7% of the heat being trapped by greenhouse gases is stored in the atmosphere, Hal begins. Do you know where the other 93% lives? A teenager, wrist-lined in aquamarine beaded bracelets, rubs sleep from her eyes, returns her head to its resting position in her palm. The man seated behind me roots around in his briefcase for a breakfast bar. No one raises a hand. In the ocean, Hal continues, the heat is expanding the ocean, which is contributing to sea level rise, and it is also, more importantly, creating the setting for something we really don't want to have happen: rapid melt of ice. A woman wearing a sequined teal top opens her 5-star notebook and starts writing things down. The guy behind her shovels spoonfuls of passion fruit flavored Chobani yogurt into his tiny mouth. Hal's 3 sons are perched in the next row back. One has a ponytail, one is in a suit, and the third crosses and uncrosses his gray street sneakers. The one with the ponytail brought a water bottle. The other 2 sip Starbucks. And behind the rows and rows of sparsely occupied seats at the very back of the amphitheater, an older woman with a gold brocade bear on her top paces back and forth. A real estate developer interrupts Hal to ask, is someone recording this? Yes, the cameraman coughs. Besides, Hal adds, I say the same damn thing at least 5 times a week. Hal, who is in his early 70s and has been studying sea level rise for over 40 years, pulls at his Burt Reynolds mustache, readjusts his taupe corduroy suit, and continues. On the screen above his head, clips from a documentary on climate change show glacial tongues of ice the size of Manhattan tumbling into the sea. The big story in Greenland and Antarctica is that the warming ocean is working its way in, deep under the ice sheets, causing the ice to collapse faster than anyone predicted, which in turn will cause sea levels to rise faster than anyone predicted. According to Marco Rubio, the junior senator from Florida, rising sea levels are uncertain, their connection to human activity tenuous, and yet the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change expects roughly 2 feet of rise by century's end. The United Nations predicts 3 feet. And the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimates an upper limit of 6.5 feet. Take the 6 million people who live on the South Florida today and divide them into 2 groups. Those who live less than 6.5 feet above the current high tide, and everybody else. The numbers slice nearly evenly. Heads or tails, call it in the air. If you live here, all you can do is hope that when you put down roots, your choice was somehow prophetic. But Hal says it doesn't matter whether you live 6 feet above sea level or 65, because he, like James Hansen, believes that all of these predictions are, to put it mildly, very, very low. The rate of sea level is currently doubling every 7 years. And if it were continue in this manner, Ponzi scheme style, we would have 205 feet of sea level rise by 2095, he says. And while I don't think we're going to get that much water by the end of the century, I do think we have to take seriously the possibility that we could have something like 15 feet by then. Excuse me. It's a little after 9 o'clock. Hal's sons stop sipping their lattes, and the oceanographic scientist behind me puts down his handful of M&Ms. If Hal Wanless is right, every single object I have seen over the past 72 hours, the periodic table of elements hanging above his left shoulder, the buffet currently loaded with refreshments, the smoothie stand at my seaside hotel, the beach umbrellas and oxygen bars, the Johnny Rockets and seashell shop, the lecture hall with its hundreds of mostly empty teal swivel chairs will be underwater in the not-so-distant future. One of the few stories I remember from the Bible vividly depicts the natural and social world in crisis. It is the apocalyptic narrative par excellence, Noah's flood. When I look it up again, however, I'm surprised to find that it does not start with a rainstorm or an ark, but earlier with unprecedented population growth and God's scorn. It begins when human beings began to increase in number on the earth. I read this line and think about the 6,000 inhabitants of South Florida turning into 6 million in 120 short years. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become. I think about the exponential increase in M&Ms, Giovanni yogurt cups, and grande lattes consumed over the same span of time. The dizzying supply chains, cheap labor, and indestructible plastic. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Wow. You know, it's apparent, there are actually a lot of great things in the Bible, and it's apparent that people just not pay attention to certain passages because they're like, oh yeah. Hmm. So the rain begins. So the rain began. I do not believe in a vengeful God, if God exists at all. So I do not think of the flood as punishment for human sin. What interests me most is what happens to the story when I remove it from the religious framework. Noah's flood is one of the most fully developed accounts of environmental change in ancient history. It tries to make sense of cataclysmic earthbound event that happened long ago, before written language, before the domestication of horses, before the first Egyptian mummies and the rise of civilization in Crete. An event for which the teller clearly held humans responsible. Dig into geologic history and you discover this. When sea levels have risen in the past, they have usually not done so gradually, but rather in rapid surges, jumping as much as 50 feet over a short 3 centuries. Scientists call these events meltwater pulses because the near biblical rise in the height of the ocean is directly correlated to the melting of ice and the process of deglaciation. The very events featured in the documentary footage Hal has got running on the screen above his head. He shows us a clip of the largest glacial calving event ever recorded. It starts with a chunk of ice the size of Miami's tallest building tumbling head over tail off the tip of the Greenland ice sheet. Then the Southeast Financial Center goes, displaying its cool blue underbelly. It is a cultish thing, smooth and oddly muscular. The ground between the two turns to Arctic ice dust and the ocean boils up. Next, chunks of ice the size of the marquee residences crash away. Then the Wells Fargo Center falls, and with it goes 900 Biscayne Bay. Suddenly, everything between the Brickell neighborhood and the Park West is gone. The clip begins again, and I watch it in awe as a section of the Jacobson Glacier, half the size of Miami, falls into the sea. Greenland is currently calving chunks of ice so massive they produce earthquakes up to 6 and 7 on the Richter scale. Hal says as the city of ice breaks apart. There was not much noticeable ice melt before the 90s, but now it accelerates every year, exceeding all predictions. It will likely cause a pulse of meltwater into the oceans. In medicine, a pulse is something regular, a predictable throb of blood through veins produced by a beating heart. It is so reliable, so steady, so definite that lack of pulse is sometimes considered synonymous with death. A healthy adult will have a resting heart rate of 60 to 100 beats per minute every day until they don't. But a meltwater pulse is the opposite. It is an anomaly, the exception to the 15,000-year rule. From 1900 to 2000, the glacier on the screen retreated inward 8 miles. Again, global minimum people. This is, you know, this is not this is not the result of cooling. From 2001 to 2010, it pulled back 9 more miles. Over a single decade, the Jakobshan Glacier lost more ice than it had during the previous century. And then there is this film clip recorded over 70 minutes in which the glacier retreats a full mile across a calving face 3 miles wide. This is why I believe we are witnessing the beginning of the largest meltwater pulse in modern human history, Hal says. As the ice sheets above Hal's head falls away and the snacks on the buffet disappear, topography is transformed from a backwater physical science into the single most important factor determining the longevity of the sunshine state. The man seated next to me leans over. If what he says is even half true, he whispers, Florida is about to be wiped off the map. And don't forget that it's not just about the level of the rise of the sea. The problem is that even with a small rise in sea level, every time there's a storm, every time there's a high tide, every time there's a king tide, Miami is already being inundated by king tides. So you have a situation where, you know, maybe the sea level isn't, you know, in Miami yet, but it's so high that even just a regular tide floods the city. So you have people dealing with this. How do you keep functioning if that's what you have happening? Wiped off the map isn't even about a foot of sea level rise or even a couple inches. It's about the fact that, you know, if you get yourself into a position where every tide is flooding your city, then you are no longer capable of doing business unless you're doing, you know, taking really extreme measures to keep on going. You know, let's just keep this train going. The same goes for Louisiana. The same goes for, you know, all low-lying states along the Gulf. South Carolina, North Carolina, you know, I can go on and on. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so with the links below. Hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.